Somewhere in northern Germany, a teenager pressed record. He did not know what he was starting. It was sometime in the early 1980s. German radio stations played music late into the night, mixing well-known artists with original acts, local recordings, and unknown bands that would never make it further than a local club. A teenager sat in his bedroom with a cassette recorder running, capturing whatever he liked the sound of. He cut out the DJ voices deliberately, leaving only the music. He wanted clean recordings. He did not always catch the names, but he knew what moved him. One song in particular was different from the others. It had a moody, melancholic quality, a restless energy, like music recorded in a city that does not quite trust the morning. The singer's voice carried an accent the teenager could not quite place. The instruments layered carefully, almost carefully enough. The recording lasted around 3 minutes. He had no idea who made it. He wrote a question mark on the cassette case next to it and moved on. The cassette went into a drawer. Question mark stayed, and the song slept for more than 20 years. The 1980s gave way to the 90s and then to the 2000s. The teenager grew into an adult. He moved away from the coastal city where he had grown up. The cassette travelled with him in a box, the way small objects from childhood do. It was not important. It was not even musical to him anymore. It was just a tape he had kept. The question mark on the label had faded. The music inside had not. The magnetic tape inside the cassette was aging. All magnetic tape does. The iron oxide particles that hold a sound recording begin to shed over time, a process so quiet it is invisible until it is too late. The music captured on that cassette was decaying at the molecular level, one microscopic flake at a time. No one was listening, no one was preserving it, no one even knew it mattered yet. His sister was curious about the old tapes. She had grown up in the same house, heard some of the same music. There was something compelling about recovering old recordings. Not just the sound, but the act of finding something that had almost been lost. She spent time with a cassette player and a computer, converting analog waves into digital files, one tape at a time. The process is painstaking. Magnetic tape is fragile. She did not want to lose whatever was left. When she reached the tape with the question mark, she listened again. The sound quality was rough. There was the hiss of analog recording, the subtle warping of old tape, a slight mechanical flutter in the playback. But the song was still there, still moody, still unidentified. She typed a few words into an online forum. Does anyone know this song? And attached the audio. She did not expect much, she just wanted to know. The year was 2007. The internet was already large. Video sites, music databases, forums for every possible interest. If a song had ever been professionally released, someone online would know it. The tools for identifying music were still primitive by later standards, but the human knowledge base was enormous. The right person, given the right audio clip, could identify almost anything. Could identify it, that is, unless the song had never been widely released at all. The initial responses to the forum post were well-intentioned but unhelpful. Guesses came in, names of known new wave artists, suggestions of similar sounding tracks. None of them matched. Professional music databases had no record of it. Audio fingerprinting tools came back empty. The song existed outside every catalogue, every register, every database. It was in the audio file she had uploaded. It was nowhere else on the accessible internet. The silence from official sources was total. What remained was the song itself. Roughly 3 minutes of unnamed music from an unnamed band recorded off a German radio station that no longer kept archives of that era. The original broadcaster had no searchable record for those years. The DJ who had played it was untraceable. The band that performed it had left no digital footprint. The internet knew nothing. And for a while the search quietly stalled. But the post stayed up, and in the strange, patient way of online communities, it occasionally attracted fresh attention. Someone new would stumble across it and try again. A music historian would listen and offer a careful guess. A linguist would note something about the singer's accent. Nothing led anywhere conclusive. The song became a small, persistent open question. Not famous, not solved, not forgotten. Just waiting. The audio files circulated slowly through music forums. Each new listener heard the same mystery the original poster had. Online music communities had been solving mysteries like this for years. Someone would share a half-remembered melody from a film, a jingle from a television show, a snippet of something their parent used to play. The collective intelligence of thousands of music lovers was remarkable. They had identified songs from a few hummed bars. They had traced recordings to regional radio stations in countries most people never thought about. This was difficult, but difficult was not impossible. The tools available to the early searchers were limited. Music recognition software of that era was built on commercial catalogues. It matched what was in a database and returned nothing when no match existed. The song had never been commercially released in any form that entered a catalogue. No label, no distributor, no digital storefronts. The song predated the era when small regional bands routinely released music independently. It had simply been played on radio, then vanished. Researchers who listened carefully noted several characteristics. The song appeared to be from the early to mid-1980s, based on the production style and instrumentation. The synthesizer textures and guitar tone pointed toward new wave or post-punk. The singer's accent suggested German origins but was not definitively placeable. The lyrics, partially audible, contained a phrase some interpreted as a place name. These were leads. None of them went anywhere. The search flickered. Interest rose and fell across the years like a signal drifting in and out of range. For roughly 12 years, the mystery bubbled along at a low frequency. Occasional posts, occasional new guesses, occasional dead ends. The audio file migrated from platform to platform as the internet itself changed. The forums of 2007 looked different from the platforms of 2015, but the song remained the same, and so did the question attached to it. No one could say who had made it, or why it had vanished so completely. By 2019, the internet had changed profoundly. Individual forums and music news groups had given way to large aggregated communities where millions of users could encounter the same content simultaneously. A post that might have received 200 responses in 2007 could reach 200,000 people by 2019. Someone reposted the mystery audio to one of these large communities. Within hours, it had attracted tens of thousands of listeners. The response was unlike anything the mystery had seen before. Users arrived from different backgrounds. Professional musicians, acoustic engineers, and historians of regional German culture. The song was analysed with tools that had not existed in 2007. Waveform visualizers, spectral analysis software, audio comparison engines. None of them found a match. But the community forming around the effort was enormous. A dedicated forum section was created specifically for the search. Within weeks, it had grown to tens of thousands of members. Ground rules emerged organically. Do not post guesses without evidence. Search a band thoroughly before suggesting it. Document what has already been eliminated. The community had the discipline of a research team and the energy of people doing something they genuinely believed mattered. They called the song the most mysterious song on the internet, and the name stuck. Tens of thousands of bands had been checked and eliminated. The answer was somewhere in the silence between. The methodology grew more refined. Community members compiled lists of every new wave band active in Germany between 1980 and 1988. They cross-referenced these with regional festival records, radio archives, and music reviews from the era. When a band was identified as possible, a searcher would contact former members directly, writing to old addresses, sending messages to people who had not been in a band for 30 years. Most did not respond. Some said no. The acoustic analysis team was particularly systematic. They isolated individual instrument tracks and compared them against known recordings. The guitar style pointed toward a subset of German post-punk. The drum machine had a pattern suggesting a specific hardware sequencer from the mid-80s. The The synthesizer patch was unusual. Not a preset, something programmed by someone with access to particular hardware. This was getting precise. But precise was not enough. False identifications were a recurring problem. Occasionally a community member would post what appeared to be a breakthrough. A band name, a song title, a recording that sounded unmistakably similar. The community would surge with excitement, then deflate when the comparison fell apart. The temptation to declare a solution is powerful when a mystery has lasted long enough. Each false answer left the community a little more cautious, a little more rigorous, and a little more determined. The singer's voice was one of the hardest elements to analyse. Voices are deeply individual, and the vocal on the mystery recording was partially obscured by the recording conditions. The cassette quality, the radio broadcast compression, the decades of magnetic decay. Linguists who listened could narrow the origin to a general region of northern Germany, but nothing more specific. The exact accent was somewhere between coastal northern German and something more neutral, as if the singer had been trained. 2020, 2021. The search continued through a lockdown world. There is something particular about a mystery that has already survived long enough to resist smart people with good tools. This mystery had done that. It had outlasted music identification software archivists, professional musicians, and acoustic engineers. Each failure did not diminish it. Each failure made it more compelling. By the time 2 years had passed since the surge in interest, the community was still there, still searching, still certain an answer existed. The community developed a kind of collective mythology around the song. Theories multiplied. Some believed it was not a professional recording at all, that it was a demo tape, something the band made in a living room, played on local radio once and never again. Others believed it had been released on a limited regional pressing, the cassette sold at a small venue, copies long since discarded. A few believed it had been deliberately kept secret, for reasons no one could articulate. There was also the question of the song itself. People listened not for analysis, but for the experience. Members wrote about what the song felt like, the texture of that synthesizer line, the way the voice hesitated before certain syllables, the sense of a melody trying to remember itself. The mystery had become inseparable from the music. You could not hear one without the other. Someone always came back. Someone always found a new angle, a new archive, a new thread to pull. In 2022, a researcher spent months contacting former employees of the relevant broadcasting station. Most could not remember specific songs from nearly 4 decades earlier. Some described how playlist records were kept, not carefully enough to be useful. One recalled that unsigned local acts were sometimes played without full documentation. This was consistent with what the community suspected, but it still did not identify the song. A parallel team focused on geography. The song was believed to originate in northern Germany. New wave bands in that region during the early 1980s had a particular circuit. The same venues, the same festivals, the same occasional radio opportunities. Someone mapped these circuits, building a picture of that local music scene. The research narrowed the search considerably, but the band was still not in any record they had found. By 2023, many in the community had accepted that the mystery might remain unresolved, not because they had given up, but because they were honest about what they had and had not found. Every band that fit the description had been checked. Every archive that could plausibly contain the relevant records had been contacted. The search had been thorough in a way that few internet efforts ever are, and still nothing. The answer would come, when it came, from a direction no one had thought to look. In late 2023, a researcher who had been following the mystery became interested in the community's geographic hypothesis. Northern Germany, early 1980s, new wave, small venues. He began searching not music databases, but local newspaper archives, a digitized historical record of small-town cultural life, newspapers that had covered local concerts and events in those years. This was a different kind of research, slower, more patient. He found references to an event organised by the Northern German public broadcaster, a showcase for emerging regional acts. Local bands performed and the event was covered in local newspapers. In the column inches of small concert reviews, band names appeared that had never made it into any music database. Acts so local they had left no other digital footprints. The researcher began going through each of them, one at a time. It was painstaking work of the kind that does not look impressive from the outside. Reading archived newspaper pages, cross-referencing names, looking for bands that fit the description in the mystery recording, the instrumentation, the error, the geography. Most names led nowhere. A few were identifiable but clearly wrong. And then one name appeared in a review from 1984. A small group from a coastal city. The review mentioned a keyboard player, a guitarist, and a singer with an unusual voice. He found a way to contact a former member of that group. The message he sent was simple. "Do you still have any recordings from that time?" The wait that followed was the kind of silence that can mean anything, and then a reply arrived. Yes. There were some old cassettes. Yes, there were recordings. One of them was a song with a title he had not heard in 40 years. The title was 3 words. The researcher read them and went very still. He compared the recording the former member sent against the mystery audio, the voice, the synthesizer line, the guitar tone, the drum machine pattern, the structure of the melody. He listened multiple times, carefully, the way the community had trained thousands of people to listen carefully. There was no reasonable doubt. This was the same song, the same performance. The same recording that a teenager in northern Germany had captured from a radio broadcast more than 40 years earlier. He knew. He had found it. On the 4th of November 2024, a single post appeared in the community. I found it. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of comments arrived within the first hour. People who had been searching for years, or 6 months, arrived at the same moment of collective recognition. There was verification to be done. But even before the rigorous analysis was complete, most people who listened knew. The particular certainty that comes from 17 years of careful listening was unmistakable. This was it. The verification process was careful and thorough. Community members with the deepest audio analysis expertise compared the original mystery recording against the version provided by the former band member. The waveforms aligned. The acoustic fingerprints matched. The specific characteristics that had puzzled the community. The synthesizer patch, the vocal phrasing, the drum machine timing, were all explained by the same recording session, the same band, in northern Germany in 1984. The news travelled faster than anything the community had seen before. The 17-year question had an answer. Major news outlets picked up the story within 24 hours. The mystery of the most mysterious song on the internet had been one of those recurring internet curiosities that journalists return to occasionally over the years. But now it had an ending, a resolution, a band name, a song title. The coverage was global. The story appeared in European outlets, American media, online publications in a dozen languages. Everyone wanted to know who the band was and what they had to say. Somewhere on the northern coast of Germany, a retired musician's phone began to ring. He did not understand why. The band had been 4 people in their early 20s when they recorded that song. By the time the internet found them, they were in their late 60s. They had not played music together professionally for decades. They had not known that a recording from 1984 had been heard by millions of people who could not name them. They had been famous in absentia, celebrated without knowledge. The song had travelled further without them than it ever had with them. One of the former band members gave an interview shortly after the identification was confirmed. He said the group was absolutely overwhelmed. They had not noticed any internet phenomenon. The song's title was not known online, so there was no way for them to trace it. He learned about it only when someone reached out directly. What the song had become while they were simply living their lives was difficult to absorb. The community that had formed around the search processed the resolution in complicated ways. There was enormous relief. There was satisfaction, the intellectual satisfaction of a question answered, a puzzle solved after the kind of effort that no single person could have managed alone. There was also something that resembled grief. The mystery had been the centre of the community's identity for years. Its resolution meant a kind of ending. The forum was still there, but the reason for it had changed. The question that had lasted 17 years closed in a single afternoon. The silence it left was enormous. The technical documentation of the solution was meticulous. The community published a detailed account of how the identification had been made and what had been confirmed by the former band members. Every claim was sourced. Every comparison was provided for independent review. The methodology that thousands of volunteers had refined over years of failed attempts had, in the end, worked exactly as it was supposed to. What remained was the question of the song itself. For 17 years it had existed only as a mystery, a degraded cassette recording of unknown origin. Now it had a name and a band. A family member located a cassette copy of the original broadcast recording, and a higher quality version was found in the lead singer's personal archives. The master tape was still missing, but there was enough to confirm what had been found. The band behind the mystery had formed in a coastal city in northern Germany in 1983. 4 young musicians who loved the sound coming out of Britain and continental Europe. Moody, electronic, slightly restless. They played local venues. They recorded a handful of songs. They performed at a regional festival organised by the local public broadcaster. One of those performances, or a recording from around that time, made it onto the radio. Someone taped it. That was enough. They played small stages in a coastal city. They did not know the radio was listening at all. The history of the band exists only in fragments now, a cassette with a few songs, a handful of newspaper reviews from small local publications, photographs from performances in the mid-80s that circulate in the online community as historical documents. The band members scattered after a few years, as most young bands do. Life rearranged itself around careers and families and the ordinary distances of time. Music was something they had done once when they were young. For 40 years, a cassette recorded in 1984 was just an old tape, a memory of something they had been, not pride or loss, just a fact. They had not kept track of it. They could not have imagined that tens of thousands of people were listening obsessively, analysing every second, trying to reach them across 4 decades of silence. The reaction of the former band members to the discovery was a mixture of emotions that is difficult to categorise. Overwhelmed, one of them said. Moved, in the way that unexpected recognition moves people who had not prepared for it. There was also a kind of disbelief. The strangeness of learning that a piece of your younger self had been travelling the world without you, accumulating listeners and meaning in your absence, for longer than most careers in music last. They had been unknown for 40 years. In a week, millions learned their name. It did not feel real. Almost immediately, conversations began about what came next. A recording label expressed interest in formally releasing the song. The community that had spent years searching for the band now wanted to support them, to give the music a proper release, a proper credit, a proper place in the record. The idea of a vinyl pressing, a physical object that carried the band's name, was discussed. The formal release happened in the months following the identification. The original cassette recording, cleaned and remastered with care, was pressed onto vinyl by a small independent label. For the first time in 40 years, the song had a cover. It had a catalogue number. It had a place in the physical and digital world where you could find it with just a name. The community that had created the demand watched the release with the quiet satisfaction of having made something happen. The re-release attracted attention far beyond the original community. Music journalists who had covered the search wrote about the resolution. Streaming catalogues that had never hosted the song added it. Listeners who had heard the mystery audio but had not been part of the search now encountered it with full context. A name, a band, a story, a 40-year journey from a cassette in a drawer to a vinyl pressing with proper credits and a place in the permanent record. In June of 2025, the band performed live for the first time in 4 decades. The performance took place in the region where the band had originally formed. The members who were available gathered on a small stage. Songs that had existed only on degraded cassette tape were played again, live, by the people who had written them. The community that had found them watched online and in person. It was not a large event by any commercial measure, but by almost any other measure, it was remarkable. 4 musicians playing songs they had written when they were young. The mystery had become a reunion. The community had become, in a very real sense, the reason a band existed again after 4 decades. This is not the normal relationship between listeners and musicians. Normally listeners come to music that already exists. Here a community had searched for music until they found both the recording and the people behind it, then collectively made the case for why it mattered. The musicians had been waiting without knowing they were waiting. There is a larger story here that this mystery illuminates. Every decade of recorded music contains countless recordings that were made but never properly archived. Regional acts, demo tapes, one-time radio performances by bands that dissolved before they had a chance to become historical. These recordings exist somewhere, on old tapes in attics, on cassettes in drawers, on reels in storage rooms. Most of them will never be found. Most of them are already lost. The magnetic tape that captured the song in the 1980s was never designed for permanence. It was designed for convenience, for affordability, for the ability to record and replay. The music that ended up on that tape was incidental to its purpose. It was not archived. It was not preserved. It was simply captured by accident of enthusiasm, by a teenager who liked the sound of something playing on the radio and pressed record before the song ended. Digital networks changed what was possible for lost recordings. The same systems that made it easy to forget content also made it possible to recover it. A community of tens of thousands could do what no individual could. Systematically eliminating possibilities, building and sharing expertise, reaching across languages and borders, contacting people who had not thought about their old band in decades. The internet had both created the obscurity and resolved it. The community that formed around the search did not set out to become a research institution. It formed because people were genuinely curious. That curiosity accumulated over years into something with real scholarly rigour. Documentation standards, verification protocols, systematic methodology. When the answer came, it was accepted and rejected according to those standards, not just celebrated. The community had taught itself how to do this kind of work, because the work mattered enough to get right. In northern Germany, a cassette tape survived long enough to be heard. That turned out to be everything. The story of the most mysterious song on the internet is, at its centre, a story about survival. Most of what was recorded on cassette tape in the 1980s is now gone. The iron oxide has shed. The tapes have broken. The bands have been forgotten in ways that feel permanent. This particular song was almost gone. Saved, it was a teenager who pressed record and a sister who cared enough to digitise an old tape before it was too late. There are probably thousands of similar mysteries still waiting in drawers and attics across the world. Songs played once, recorded by accident, never identified. Artists who made something real whose work survived but who have no way of knowing it. The most mysterious song on the internet was one of the fortunate ones. Community that found it was patient, rigorous, and lucky enough to look in the right place. The song still plays. It plays in streaming catalogues now, properly credited, with a note that tells the story. It plays in the memory of everyone who spent any time searching for it. It plays for people who heard it as a mystery and now hear it differently. As a completed thing, a question with an answer. The music that was almost lost is not lost anymore. If you have listened this far, you have heard the full arc of a mystery that lasted nearly 2 decades and ended in a small coastal city in 2025. The internet's capacity for patience, when curiosity runs deep enough, is one of its most underappreciated qualities. If you have ever wondered what other songs are still waiting to be found, that thought is worth carrying with you. It arrived without warning, a plain white mailer, inside a black VHS cassette marked with 7 hexagons. In early April 2026, identical packages began appearing in the mailboxes of music listeners across Europe and North America. No return address, no accompanying note. Just a black VHS tape sealed in plastic, its spine impressed with a pattern of 7 tessellated hexagons. Each recipient had recently purchased merchandise from the same small independent music label. None of them had been told to expect anything. The tapes arrived, and then they waited to be played. The first recordings surfaced online within hours. Someone connected an old VCR to a capture card and played back the results. What appeared was not a music video or promotional content. It was something harder to place. Abstract geometric shapes drifting across a washed-out field, textures shifting, muted colours cycling without logic. Beneath it all, an audio layer played. Something recorded in the wrong decade and played back in the wrong one. By the following morning, 43 recipients had identified themselves on fan forums. Each had received a tape. Each tape played slightly different content. The abstract forms varied. The audio layers differed, yet every cassette bore the same 7 hexagons, precisely rendered. What had arrived at 43 doors across multiple countries was not a single message. It was 43 fragments of something larger. Something that would only make sense once all the pieces had been compared. The internet descended. It analysed. It compared. 43 people had a piece of something none of them could yet name. Online forums came alive overnight. Listeners posted frame-by-frame breakdowns comparing timestamps and cataloguing every audio fragment. Someone ran the tape's soundtrack through a spectrum analyzer. Embedded in the distorted noise, invisible to the ear but legible to a computer, were patterns consistent with frequency shift keying. An old method for sending digital data over analog audio signals. Someone had hidden a message in the static. Frequency shift keying is a technique from an earlier era. Before broadband, machines used sound to carry data. A modem converted binary information into alternating tones that could travel over telephone lines or magnetic tape. This method had not been used to encode audio for distribution in decades. Whoever embedded these patterns had done so deliberately, reaching backward in time to pull out a language most of the world had forgotten. Questions spreading through every forum was not simply what the data said. It was who had sent it. The merchandise label that dispatched the tapes distributed records from a handful of artists, most of them obscure. But one was not obscure. One was legendary, not for scandal or controversy, but for something far stranger. They were legendary for disappearing. For releasing music so rarely and quietly that entire years would pass with no word from them at all. 13 years had passed since this collective had released a new record. In music time, 13 years is enough for entire careers to bloom and collapse. Platforms that did not exist when they last released music now hosted billions of songs. Entire genres had emerged and dissolved. And through all of it, Scottish electronic music collective had said nothing. No interviews, no tours. Just a silence so complete it had begun to feel permanent. For the listeners who had followed this music for years, the arrival of the tapes was not merely mysterious. It was something closer to a reappearance. An acknowledgement that someone was still there. After 13 years with no official word, 43 physical objects had arrived through the postal system at the doors of strangers. Not a press release, not a trailer, just tape and hexagons. And inside the noise, something waiting to be decoded. To understand the tapes, you must first understand who sent them, and why they stayed silent so long. The collective had formed in Scotland in the late 1980s. 2 musicians working in a home studio, building sound from fragments. Samples cut from old television broadcasts, nature recordings, and degraded magnetic tape. Their music was unlike anything being produced at the time. warm and melancholy, dense with layered texture, suffused with something that felt like nostalgia for experiences that had never quite happened. Their early releases came through small cassette labels and underground networks. The recordings circulated among quiet fans who treated them like found objects. Sounds to be discovered rather than bought. There was a deliberate mystery to how the music was released. Track titles were often cryptic or absent. Liner notes were sparse. The duo gave almost no interviews. What little they said was chosen carefully, rarely repeated, and often designed to raise more questions than it resolved. By the late 1990s, they had become one of the most respected names in electronic music. Their records were studied, dissected, written about at length, and yet the duo remained almost entirely absent from public life. They did not perform live. They did not explain their methods. They allowed the music to exist without commentary, which made the commentary far richer. Listeners filled the silence with theory and meaning, and the collective never corrected any of it. The hexagon was always there, on every sleeve, every poster, every piece of official material. 7 hexagons. 7 hexagons appeared on nearly every visual object the collective had produced. 6 cells surrounding a central 7th. The pattern was instantly recognisable to anyone who knew the music. It appeared on record sleeves, limited edition packaging, and objects released across 3 decades. In fan discussions, the configuration was analysed at length. Some read it as a reference to honeycomb geometry. Others treated it as a cipher, a code waiting to be read. The mathematics behind repeating hexagonal patterns are ancient. A hexagon divides space with near-perfect efficiency. The form appears wherever energy must be minimised. In basalt columns, in the spiral scales of a pine cone, in the compound eye of an insect. The number 7 carries resonances of its own in music theory and cryptographic traditions. Whether the choice was intentional, it could not be separated from meaning. Their 2013 record had not arrived quietly. Months before any music was released, cryptic signals appeared on shortwave radio frequencies. Number sequences broadcast as encoded audio, an invitation to listen carefully before the invitation had been formally extended. When the album arrived, it was dark and complex, sounding like the aftermath of something catastrophic. Now, 13 years later, the hexagons had reappeared, on 43 VHS tapes, in mailboxes. The shortwave numbers from 2013 were still archived online. Someone pulled them out of storage and began to compare. Recordings of the 2013 shortwave transmissions had been preserved and archived by radio enthusiasts. Those sequences had been decoded by the fan community into a message pointing toward the forthcoming album. In 2026, researchers with the new tapes compared their FSK audio against the archived 2013 material and found structural similarities. The encoding method was related. Someone had continued a system begun 13 years earlier, or had never stopped using it. The fan community had long known that this collective treated music as a kind of archaeology. Their recordings were built from fragments of an analogue past, retrieved from old educational films, nature documentaries, and obsolete tape formats. Their process involved finding something still living inside discarded material. The VHS tapes were artifacts in the same tradition, objects recovered from an analogue world that digital culture had tried to erase. The VHS format had been widely dominant from the late 1970s through the mid-1990s. Its unique artifacts, horizontal distortion bands, colour bleeding at transitions, the warped audio at the start of a long tape, were not merely visual choices in the new recordings. They were the actual properties of a physical format that stored time on magnetic particles aligned in patterns so dense they could be altered by a nearby magnet, a warm room, or decades of neglect. By the time the tapes arrived in 2026, the VHS format had been widely extinct for nearly 2 decades. Most households had discarded their players. Finding a working VCR was itself a minor archival exercise for some recipients. Second-hand shops saw a sudden surge of searches for old hardware. Detailed guides appeared in forums explaining how to connect old machines to modern capture cards. A technology declared obsolete was briefly, urgently necessary again. This was the first layer of the message, not just what was on the tape, but the tape itself. To access the content, you had to find old hardware, connect it to new technology, and translate one era's storage method into another's. The experience of receiving and playing the tape was a demonstration of what the music had always been about. The way the past persists inside formats the present has moved beyond, waiting for someone to find a way to play it back. Once people had working players, they sat down with footage, and they began to watch very carefully. The visual content of the tapes fell into three categories. The first was abstract moving imagery, geometric shapes in desaturated tones. The second was degraded footage of natural environments, forests, water, open sky, reduced to near abstract impressions. The third was most unusual, brief sequences of what appeared to be handwritten text, too degraded to read clearly, not identical across all tapes. Something was being written across all 43 tapes simultaneously. The handwritten text sequences were the most striking element for many researchers. In a small number of tapes, a frame or two would appear in which something like cursive writing was briefly visible before collapsing into noise. Frame-by-frame analysis let fragments be recovered. Individual letter forms emerged, then partial words. Not enough to form complete sentences from any single tape, but across multiple tapes, shared and aligned by the community, patterns began to emerge. The FSK data encoded in the audio was being decoded in parallel. Software tools built for amateur radio, programs designed to translate tone sequences back into text, were being repurposed for the task. The decoded outputs were fragmentary, character strings, partial words, what appeared to be geographic points too imprecise to verify, and numbers matching known shortwave bands, suggesting certain receivers might pick up something intended for them. The fragments were being collected, pooled, assembled. Something was forming at the centre of all the noise. Across the 43 tapes, the FSK data shared a common structural pattern. There was a header segment, a consistent opening sequence appearing at the same point in every tape's audio, followed by a data body that varied between tapes. Researchers familiar with packet radio formats recognized the structure at once. Each tape carried one segment of a larger dataset, sent deliberately to all 43 people. The visual fragments confirmed what the audio data suggested. The degraded handwriting in certain frames was not the same text across all tapes. Different tapes carried different portions. When placed side by side, they appeared to form parts of a longer document. Not all was recoverable. Much remained too degraded to read, but a structure was visible, the outline of something that held meaning, with sections and what appeared to be headers. The natural environment footage was analysed for location cues. Researchers compared the vegetation, light quality and topographic hints visible through the processing against satellite imagery of known regions. The angle of light suggested a latitude range in northern Europe. The tree species were consistent with a specific part of northern Britain. The footage had not been filmed in a studio. It had been captured somewhere specific and the tapes were pointing there. Somewhere in Scotland something had been recorded, at a place the tapes were trying, in their fragmented way, to describe. The shortwave-style audio elements, distinct from the FSK data, were being analysed separately. These were atmospheric recordings, processed and layered over synthesised tones, resembling a receiver scanning frequencies at early morning hours, catching fragments of signals in unknown languages. This kind of audio had a long history among artists who treated the radio spectrum as a landscape, a terrain full of signals that existed whether or not anyone was listening. Number stations had long fascinated musicians, radio fans, and researchers alike. These were Cold War-era shortwave broadcasts, a voice reading number sequences over a carrier signal sending encrypted messages to agents in foreign countries. The receiver would consult a one-time pad and convert the numbers into instructions. Many of these stations continued broadcasting for years after the Cold War ended, their audience invisible. The shortwave aesthetic in the tape recordings was not accidental. It was something this group had cultivated across their entire catalogue. Certain earlier works had contained audio hidden beneath the surface of the mix, material embedded at specific frequencies, audible only through processing. The practice of concealing content inside music had been part of their intent from the beginning. The VHS tapes were its most elaborate expression yet. Each tape was a transmission. Each transmission carried a fragment. Together, they were forming a picture. The voice fragments embedded in the audio were the most unsettling element for many researchers. They fell at irregular intervals across a handful of tapes. Not predictably, not consistently. A voice heavily processed, speaking what sounded like phonemes assembled to resemble language without quite achieving it. Some listeners heard English phrases, others heard nothing linguistic. The results were inconclusive, but the voice was clearly present. There was a pattern to when the voice fragments appeared. They fell at moments where the visual content shifted between categories, from abstract shapes to processed landscape footage, or from natural imagery into the handwritten text sequences. The transitions were not random. The voice appeared at the edges of something, at boundaries, as though it was marking divisions that viewers were meant to notice, as though the tapes had structure and the voice was its marker. By the end of the first week, 43 tapes had been almost entirely catalogued. Every known recipient had been contacted. Their footage and audio had been digitised and uploaded. Researchers built shared documents tracking every FSK fragment, every degraded handwriting frame, every voice occurrence across every tape. The scale of the effort was large. Hundreds contributed hours to a problem not yet acknowledged by anyone involved in creating it. This was not the first time the internet had turned itself into an instrument for this kind of search. Music communities have a long history of group search. When an electronic artist released cryptic advertisements in the early 2000s, fans across message boards decoded the hidden content before any announcement was made. When another group embedded a code in a television broadcast, listeners translated it within hours. The tools existed. The enthusiasm existed. What was needed was a mystery worthy of the effort. The community around this music was well suited to the task. They had waited 13 years for new material. During that time, they had not become less organised. They built detailed wikis, maintained digital archives, and catalogued every known recording the collective had released. The system for group search was already in place. The tapes arrived into a community not merely ready for this moment. It had been ready for years. The primary forum had been running without a break for over 2 decades. One of the oldest active fan communities on the internet. It had survived platform shifts and server failures. When the tapes arrived, threads stretching back to the mid-2000s became the organising system for the decoding effort. The community had never quite stopped preparing for a moment exactly like this. The FSK data was the first major breakthrough. 3 days in, the header structure was fully mapped. A researcher with a background in amateur packet radio recognised the FSK header structure on day 3. The opening sequence of each tape's encoded layer matched a modified form of an old digital radio mode, a format for low bandwidth, high noise use last commonly seen in the late 1990s. Guides to this format had survived in archives kept by radio fans. Once the header was known, decoding the payload was a matter of running the audio through the right software. The payload data, once decoded, yielded 3 types of content. The first was a sequence of time codes, frame-accurate markers for specific moments within an audio recording. The second was a set of frequencies in the shortwave band, paired with alphanumeric codes consistent with station identifiers. The third was text, partial sentences in English that did not form a complete message, but clearly pointed toward one. Time codes became the next focus. If they mapped to a known recording, identifying the source would reveal what the timestamps were pointing at. The community compared the codes against the collective's entire catalogue, official releases, unreleased material and bootleg recordings. The process was careful but produced results. The time codes matched moments in 2 unreleased recordings known to the community. The unreleased recordings were known. They had circulated quietly for years, but no one had fully understood what they contained. Within the community, audio recordings existed that had never been officially released. Not bootlegs of live performances, but ambient works. Long, textural pieces without clear structure, sometimes an hour in length, that had passed through file-sharing networks in the mid-2000s. Their origin was unknown. They had been described as test recordings, early experiments before any official release, known to the community, but their purpose had never been established. The time codes pointed to specific moments within 2 of those ambient recordings, when researchers located those positions and listened carefully. Using audio processing and the patience only a community waiting 13 years could sustain, they found something not previously noticed. At each marked position, embedded beneath the ambient surface at very low level, there was a signal. Tonal, structured, not random, consistent with another layer of FSK encoding. The discovery implied something striking. The ambient recordings that had circulated for years, the ones assumed to be unreleased experiments, had always contained hidden data. The VHS tapes had not introduced something new. They had provided the key to something already waiting inside recordings on hard drives across the world. For more than 2 decades, a hidden layer had been sitting inside music that millions of hours of listening had never managed to reveal. The internet had not been wasting its years of listening. It had been slowly getting closer without knowing it. The frequencies decoded from the FSK payload were verified next. Community members with shortwave radio equipment began checking the listed frequencies at times noted in the codes. The effort required planning across time zones. The frequencies were active on a UTC schedule, meaning different listeners in different countries would need to tune in at different local hours. A signal appeared, weak and intermittent at first, but it was present. Something was broadcasting. The shortwave transmissions were brief. A tone sequence, a pause, a voice reading numbers in a neutral accent, and then silence. Multiple independent receivers recorded the broadcasts and uploaded them for comparison. The readings matched. The frequencies were real, and the broadcasts were not historical artifacts. They were occurring at the time the community found them. The tapes had not been pointing backward in time. They had been pointing at something happening right now. For researchers who tracked historical broadcasts, the revelation carried additional weight. This new signal matched none of the known station patterns in their databases. It was not a historical station reactivated. It was something entirely new, operating in an older format, sending content that the VHS tapes provided the key to interpret. Someone had built a number station in 2026 for this sole purpose. Something was still broadcasting, and the key to understanding it had been sitting in 43 mailboxes around the world. By the end of the second week, the community had decoded the transmissions. The content, once the key from the FSK data was applied, was text. Not a conventional message, but metadata for an audio file. File format, duration, and a cryptographic hash for verification. The file itself was not transmitted over air, but its existence was confirmed. Somewhere, a recording waited, and 43 cassettes sent to strangers through the mail had carried the means to find it. The file was found. It had been sitting on a public archive server for 11 months. Nobody had noticed it. The hash value matched a file on a publicly accessible digital archive. It had been uploaded 11 months earlier by an anonymous account, carrying no title, no description, no metadata beyond a creation timestamp and a file size. In 11 months it had been downloaded fewer than 30 times, and none of those downloads had generated any public discussion. The file had been sitting invisible in plain sight, waiting for someone to know exactly where to look. The file, when downloaded and opened, was an audio recording, 53 minutes in length, encoded at high quality in a lossless format. The community verified the hash. It matched the shortwave signal exactly. This was the file. The recording began with a single sustained tone and then expanded into something broader. Something with a warmth and texture that listeners who had spent years with this music would have recognized at once. New music. After 13 years of silence. The community's first response was not celebration. It was verification. Members with audio analysis tools confirmed the recording was consistent with the production methods that had defined the collective's earlier work. The acoustic properties matched. The musical content, while clearly new, all the identifying qualities of 3 decades of studio output, slow melodic development, textural warmth, a sense of enormous distance compressed into something intimate. It was real. 53 minutes. 13 years of silence ended by 43 pieces of magnetic tape. Within hours, the file was downloaded and shared across the community. Finding the archive had required 3 separate data streams that decoded timecodes from the FSK layers, the file format information from the tape audio, and naming fragments recovered from the degraded handwriting sequences. All 3 had to be combined to locate a single file on a public server. The system was elegant. It was not designed to be easy. The recording was later officially acknowledged by the label as the collective's first new work in 13 years. The announcement was brief. It provided no detail about the methodology, no explanation for the 43 postal packages, and no indication of what might follow. The acknowledgement came, and then the silence returned, as it always had, but this time carrying a different quality. The silence after the music was found felt unlike the silence that had preceded it. The campaign required planning across multiple systems, physical delivery, a shortwave radio signal, a public file archive, and an audio encoding method drawn from radio history. VHS tapes had to be produced and sent out. A shortwave transmitter had to be arranged and maintained. An archive account had to be created and kept anonymous. The encoded audio in old recordings had to have been placed there long before April 2026. The planning for all of this had not begun in April. It had begun years before. Perhaps decades. The discovery that the ambient recordings from the mid-2000s contained hidden FSK layers implied the encoding had been placed there at the time of original distribution. If so, pieces of this message had been seeded into the fan community as long as 20 years before the tapes arrived. The tapes had not introduced the message. They had revealed a message already present, waiting inside recordings on hard drives around the world. The patience implied by this timeline was vast. Questions about authorship and intent spread through the community in the days that followed. If the hidden layers in the old recordings had been placed there at original release, then the message had been waiting since before most current listeners had found the music. There would have been no promise that anyone would ever find it. The system was built to be findable only with the key, and the key had arrived in April 2026, 2 decades after the lock was set. The label and the collective have made no further public statements about the nature or timeline of the campaign. Whether the planning extended 20 years or whether the hidden layers were a more recent addition remains unknown. The community continues to analyse old recordings for more content. More time codes have been found, more fragments of degraded text. The search continues. The tapes were not a conclusion, they were the start of a question with no final answer. The 53-minute recording plays. Somewhere in northern Scotland, something continues. The investigation has no clear endpoint. The story of the 43 tapes is, at one level, about a music release campaign, a deliberate method for delivering new work through physical objects, radio signals, and archival audio. But at another level it is about what the digital era has done to the experience of receiving a message. In a world where information arrives instantly and in great volume, sending 43 physical cassettes through the postal service was an act of radical slowness. Physical media carries time in a way digital files cannot. A VHS tape holds its content in magnetic particles aligned along a strip of plastic. The particles degrade. The sequence is vulnerable. Playing a tape is a physical act. It requires a machine, a connection, a room, an hour. The experience of receiving and playing the tapes was not simply a puzzle, it was a demonstration of what it means to receive something made specifically for you to find. 43 people had received something through the mail. Each held a different fragment. None of the fragments meant anything alone. But together, across a network of strangers connected by shared interest in the same music, they became a complete key to a recording waiting in a public archive for 11 months. The structure of the campaign showed, in structural terms, what this community had always been doing: sharing fragments, finding the connections, making the whole thing audible. The tapes are still being analysed. The old recordings still hold layers not yet decoded. The listening continues. Digital archaeology is not always a historical practice. Sometimes it reaches into the present, into content placed carefully in open locations, designed to be found only by those with the right tools. 43 tapes remind us that in an era of instant communication, secrecy can still be maintained through complexity, that a message can sit in a public archive for 11 months unnoticed, that the internet does not always find what is there to be found. It is the night of November 2nd, 1988. Somewhere on the network, something small begins to move. The internet of 1988 bears no resemblance to what we know today. There are no web pages, no images, no video. Only a sparse network of terminals, green text on dark screens connected by telephone lines and academic goodwill. The machines sit at universities and government research facilities, communicating through an early research network. In late 1988, this network connects roughly 60,000 computers. It is a small, trusting community. Nobody has any reason yet to be afraid. The machines are not all in the same place. They sit scattered across hundreds of campuses and laboratories, connected by a web of leased lines and dedicated circuits. Each node in the network trusts the others by default. There are no firewalls. There is no authentication beyond a username and a password. The administrators who manage these systems think of themselves as part of a cooperative. Colleagues sharing a resource, not defenders guarding a perimeter. On the evening of November 2nd, the machines begin to behave strangely. Processors that should be nearly idle are running at full capacity. Simple commands take seconds to respond rather than milliseconds. Login prompts hang. Systems that should reply instantly sit frozen, as if caught in a loop they cannot exit. The administrators who notice first assume it is a hardware fault, a failed component, a misconfigured service. They reach for their logs, looking for the thing they must have missed. The phone starts ringing across the country, a campus in the east. The same symptoms, then another, then a third. The administrators compare notes. They are careful, methodical people, trained to check obvious explanations before assuming something extraordinary. But the symptoms refuse to fit anything familiar. The machines are not failing, they are consumed, occupied by some process that nobody asked them to run, using every available resource to do something invisible. It is not a hardware fault. It is not a misconfiguration. It is something that does not yet have a name. The machine logs reveal the shape of it. Hundreds of login attempts arriving from remote addresses, not at human speed, but machine speed, dozens per second. Something is trying to access every reachable machine on the network, and something is already inside many of them. The timestamps are seconds apart. The entries repeat, line after line, in a rhythm that no person could produce. Whatever is out there is not a person. By 9 in the evening on the East Coast, machines at research universities are going down. Some administrators disconnect from the network immediately to stop the spread. Others stay online, hoping to understand what they are dealing with before acting. There is no protocol for any of this. There is no organisation to call, no authority with experience in what is happening. In 1988, the concept of a coordinated cybersecurity response does not yet exist. Email is still working, barely. Administrators send warnings to each other across the same network the worm is consuming, sharing symptoms, partial theories and questions nobody can answer. Some messages never arrive. The network is too congested. Others arrive hours late. But the warning spread, slowly campus to campus, and a community that has never faced anything like this begins, haltingly, imperfectly, to form a response. By midnight, thousands of machines have gone dark. An entire research network spanning a continent has fallen silent. Morning arrives. Researchers, officials, and military personnel reach their terminals to find them unresponsive. Computer centres from the east coast to the west are entirely offline. When the damage is eventually tallied, the count falls somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 machines, roughly 1 in every 10 computers connected to the early internet. In a single overnight window, without warning and without any visible sign of an attacker, 10% of the connected world had gone quiet. Nobody fully understands yet what happened. The investigation is just beginning, but something is already clear to everyone who sat through that night. The network had been used as a vector for the first time. Something had travelled it like a living thing, finding machines, entering them, making copies of itself, and moving on. The world would soon have a name for what had just visited it. They would call it a worm. To understand what happened, you have to go back several months. At a computer science graduate program in the northeastern United States, a student is working on a research question that in 1988 seems almost philosophical. He is not motivated by malice, not chasing notoriety or money. He is curious about something simple, quiet, and as it turns out, dangerous. How large is the internet? How many machines are actually connected? Nobody knows for certain. The question seems straightforward. But the early internet has no central directory, no map, no registry of connected machines. You cannot simply look it up. The only way to count the machines on the network is to visit them. And the only practical way to visit them all is to write a program that can travel on its own, moving from machine to machine, incrementing a counter as it goes. The concept of a self-replicating program is not new. Researchers have written about it theoretically since the 1970s. Programs that can make copies of themselves and move through systems have appeared in academic papers, in thought experiments, in science fiction. But nobody has ever released one into the wild. The early internet community trusts itself. The idea that someone might use the network to spread an autonomous, self-replicating program seems, at this moment, almost quaint. He sits down to write a small program. An elegant question posed in code addressed to the entire network. The program is designed with care. It will travel from machine to machine using the network's own infrastructure. When it arrives on a new machine, it will check to see whether it is already there. If it finds itself already installed, it will stop. It will not replicate again. The design is meant to be self-limiting, a program that can spread, but that will naturally prevent itself from accumulating too many copies in any one place. But he anticipates a problem. What if a machine is configured to lie, to claim it already has the program installed when it does not? The worm would stop replicating, and the count of the network's total size would be inaccurate. This is a reasonable concern for a researcher who wants clean data. To guard against it, he adds a rule. Even if a machine claims to already have the program, the worm will replicate anyway, but only 1 time in 7. 1 in 7 sounds like a small number. In practice, it means the program can never fully stop itself. Every time it encounters a machine claiming to already be infected, there is a 1 in 7 chance that it installs anyway and begins the process again. On a connected network where machines talk to each other constantly, this is not a small number. This is exponential growth. This is the flaw that will make the program a catastrophe. To travel from machine to machine, the program needs a way in. The student identifies 3 separate vulnerabilities in software that runs on almost every machine in the network. All of them documented, none of them yet patched. A bug in an email daemon that allows remote code execution. A flaw in a remote access service that trusts the wrong credentials. A weakness in how passwords are stored and verified. The program exploits all 3 simultaneously. The program also carries a list, 432 common passwords, tried in sequence until one opens the door. Many of them work. The early internet community is not in the habit of choosing strong passwords, usernames that match passwords left at their factory defaults. Accounts set up in a hurry years ago never changed. The program moves through them systematically, trying each one, and on machine after machine, somewhere in the list, a door opens. Security, in 1988, is still mostly a matter of hoping nobody is looking. The program is also, by the standards of 1988, technically sophisticated. It is written in two parts: a small bootstrap section that does nothing but fetch the rest of the program from the infected machine that launched it, and a main body that handles travel, replication, and the various exploits. The main body is compressed and encoded. It is difficult to read, even for the experts who will eventually get their hands on it. In the late afternoon of November 2nd, the program is complete. He reviews it one final time, checking the code, tracing the logic, looking for errors. He finds none that he recognises. What he's built is smaller than he expected, and in some ways more elegant. He's aware that what he's about to do is not entirely sanctioned. He is also, somehow, not entirely aware of what it is about to become. He logs into a terminal at a distant university. At 6:02 in the evening, the program is released. Within minutes, first copies have already reached new machines. Within an hour, the worm has travelled to dozens of nodes across the network. The 1 in 7 rule is already compounding. Every infected machine is trying to infect new ones. Machines that report being already infected still have a 1 in 7 chance of infection anyway. The program is not growing at the rate its creator imagined. It is growing much, much faster. The student, watching from a distance, realises something is wrong. The program is not self-limiting. It is accelerating. He sends a message to a friend, asking him to distribute a warning and a partial fix through the same network the worm is consuming. The message arrives too late for most systems. The network is already too congested to deliver it reliably. His attempt to warn the people he has endangered is swallowed by the flood he has created. By 8 p.m, the network is overwhelmed, machines are slowing everywhere. The worm is in thousands of systems now. Across the country, the alarms go off. Not electronic ones. Human ones. Pages, phone calls, voices repeating the same question. At universities and research facilities, teams assemble in the middle of the night. Nobody has been trained for this. There is no playbook, no established procedure. The people gathering around terminal screens are researchers and professors and graduate students. People whose job is to advance knowledge, not to fight for their machines, but here they are, at midnight, trying to understand what has colonized their systems. The machines are running something. That much is clear. The processor loads are maxed, the disks are spinning. Something is consuming every available resource. But finding it, isolating it, is another matter entirely. The worm is not hiding, exactly. But it is moving so quickly, spawning so many copies of itself, that by the time any individual copy is identified and killed, dozens more have taken its place. The network itself is still technically up, but the traffic flooding it makes it nearly useless. Every infected machine is trying to contact every other machine it can reach, attempting to spread the worm, probing for open doors. The sheer volume of this traffic is crowding out all other communication. The internet is not down in the way a power grid goes down, it is drowning in itself. At a computer science department in the Midwest, a researcher sits down with a copy of The Worm and starts reading. He has obtained a fragment of the worm's code, captured from the memory of an infected machine. It is not the whole program, not yet, but it is enough to begin understanding the mechanism. He reads through the night, tracing the logic, identifying the exploits, mapping the structure. He is doing, in a compressed and desperate form, the work that would later be called malware analysis. The field does not yet have that name. He is inventing it as he goes. By early morning, he has a partial picture. He understands the 3 vulnerabilities the worm exploits. He understands the password list. He can see in the code the 1 in 7 rule, and he understands immediately why it is catastrophic. He begins writing a counter-program, not a cure exactly, but a disinfectant. A program that can be run on an infected machine to stop the worm from spreading further. The fix in principle is straightforward. Patch the 3 vulnerabilities. Remove the worm from infected machines. Enforce stronger passwords. In practice, distributing any of this is extraordinarily difficult. The network they would normally use to send information, email, file transfers, is the same network the worm is consuming. Every message they try to send competes with the worm's traffic for the same congested pipes. Emergency calls go out to vendors, to universities, to anyone with the authority to take a network node offline. Some administrators make the decision to disconnect entirely, pulling their institution off the network to stop the spread. It is not a small decision. These machines are the research infrastructure of the most connected community in the world. Going offline means losing access to collaborators, to databases, to computing resources that researchers depend on. But staying online means the worm will keep spreading. Many choose to disconnect. The information sharing problem is solved partly by going backward in time. Researchers who need to coordinate pick-up telephones, they send information by fax. Some send hard copies through campus mail. The most advanced communications network in the world is responding to its first major crisis by falling back on analog tools from decades earlier. The irony is not lost on anyone in the rooms where this is happening. A partial patch for the most critical vulnerability, the bug in the email daemon, is distributed within 12 hours of the worm's release. Getting it installed on vulnerable machines is slower. Each administrator has to apply it manually to each individual machine. There are thousands of them run by different institutions, operating under different policies, accessible only with the right credentials. This is a manual operation in a crisis that demands speed. Within 48 hours, the worm is contained. The network recovers, slowly, as infected machines are cleaned and reconnected. The final damage estimate, when it is eventually calculated, runs to hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost machine time, restoration labour and disrupted research. In 1988 terms, this is a significant sum. In terms of the future, it is almost nothing. The real cost will not be measured in dollars. For the people who spent those 48 hours at their terminals, the experience leaves a permanent mark. They have seen for the first time what a connected network looks like when it is being used against itself. They have seen it fail to coordinate, fail to communicate, fail to respond with any of the speed the threat required. They carry that memory for the rest of their careers. The worm is gone. The machines are coming back online. The network is quiet again. But nothing is the same. The cleanup takes days. Machine after machine has to be rebuilt from scratch, not patched and restored, but completely wiped and reinstalled, because nobody can be certain the worm has not left something behind. This is another first. The concept of a system being irreversibly compromised, of trust in a machine being so thoroughly broken that the only safe answer is to erase it and begin again. It is a lesson that will be repeated many times over the decades that follow. The worm is contained. The investigation begins. Federal agents ask the same question everyone else is asking. Who wrote this? The forensic analysis of the worm's code and the path of its launch is careful and methodical. Logs from affected machines trace the worm back through the network, hop by hop, toward its source. A distant university used to launch the program is identified. Records from that machine point toward a login that does not belong there. A credential used briefly at a specific moment, then abandoned. The trail is thin, but it is a trail. The person at the end of that trail is a graduate student named Robert Morris. What makes his identity striking when it becomes known is the context. His father is a senior cryptographer at the National Security Agency, one of the people whose work helped shape the security architecture of the early internet. The son of a man who helped build the network's defences had nearly destroyed the network. The irony is noted. quietly by everyone involved. It is not the irony of malice. By most accounts, Robert Morris is not a malicious person. The worm was, by his own account, an experiment, a research tool that malfunctioned. The 1 in 7 rule was a safeguard that became a failure mode. The vulnerabilities he exploited were not secrets. He simply assembled known tools into a combination nobody had thought through to its end. He contacts a lawyer and shortly afterward surrenders to authorities. His statement is consistent. The worm was never intended to damage anything. He expected it to travel quietly, count machines, and stop. The damage was an accident, a result of the flaw in the 1 in 7 rule, which he had not thought through completely. Whether that explanation is accepted will be a matter for a court to decide. In January of 1990, the trial begins. It is a federal case under a law barely 2 years old. The law he is charged under is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, passed in 1986, originally aimed at hackers who broke into government computers. It had never been used to prosecute anyone before. Robert Morris becomes, by the outcome of this trial, the first person in history to be convicted under that law. The verdict arrives in January 1990, guilty. The sentencing comes several months later. The sentence is lighter than many expected. 3 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, a fine of just over $10,000, no prison time. The judge calibrated the punishment for what the case actually was, not a calculated attack, but an experiment conducted without adequate thought for the consequences. The sentence reflects the ambiguity that would hang over computer crime law for decades to come. Robert Morris goes on to complete his doctorate. He becomes a professor. He co-founds a startup, later becomes a partner in one of the most influential technology investment programs of its era. His career continues, successful and distinguished, alongside the permanent historical footnote of the night he nearly broke the internet. He is, by most accounts, a person who learned from what he did and who spent the rest of his career contributing to the field it had damaged. For the internet itself, however, the worm is not a footnote. The weeks immediately after the incident produced something that the network has never had before, a formal, funded, government-backed organisation whose sole purpose is to coordinate the response to future incidents like this one. It is the first cybersecurity institution of the modern era, and its existence begins because of that one night in November. The world's first computer emergency response team stands up within weeks. The internet now has an immune system. The team is staffed initially by researchers who were awake the night the worm spread, people who had fought it with whatever they had, telephone lines, fax machines, half-written patches distributed by hand. They are given an institutional home at a major research university in Pennsylvania. They are given a mandate to monitor the network for threats, coordinate responses, and make sure that next time the response is faster and better organised. The model is replicated. Within years, similar teams appear at universities and government agencies across the country. Within a decade, they exist in dozens of countries. Within 2 decades, nearly every major government and hundreds of private organisations maintain their own version of what was built in the weeks after November 1988. The infrastructure of modern cybersecurity, traced back to its source, leads to this moment. The worm also changes something less tangible. Before November 2nd, 1988, most of the people on the early internet assumed that the network was fundamentally safe. This assumption was never written down anywhere. It did not need to be. It was simply the shared understanding of a community of colleagues who trusted each other, because they had always trusted each other, and nothing had given them a reason not to. After November 2nd, 1988, that assumption is gone. It does not return. Every conversation about network architecture, every design decision, every new protocol proposed from that point forward carries, somewhere inside it, the awareness that the network is not inherently safe, that it can be used against itself, that the question of security is not an afterthought, it is the beginning of the conversation, every time. Code still exists, preserved in archives, loaded with care into isolated systems where it cannot touch the world. The worm source is not large by any modern measure, its bootstrap section. The part that runs first fetches the rest of the program and initiates the infection process. Is fewer than 100 lines. The main body runs to a few thousand more. In the hierarchy of malicious software that comes after it, the Morris worm is modest, but size is not what made it significant. Researchers who study the code describe it as elegant. The 3 exploits are not brute force, they are precise, each targeting the specific behavior in a specific piece of widely used software. The password list is carefully chosen. The bootstrap mechanism is clean and efficient. It is the work of someone who understood the systems he was targeting deeply, which makes it more dangerous, not less, that he misjudged what it would do. In university courses on computer security, the worm's code is read the way medical students read historical case studies of diseases. Not to replicate it, the vulnerabilities it exploited are long obsolete, but to understand how infections propagate, how they resist containment, how a small flaw in a self-limiting mechanism becomes a catastrophic runaway process. The worm teaches something that formal security theory alone cannot. Security researchers still load the worm into air-gapped machines, computers deliberately disconnected from any network, to observe it working. It still behaves exactly as it did in 1988. It still tries to spread. It still probes for the vulnerabilities it was built to exploit, still tries the passwords on its list. Those specific vulnerabilities no longer exist on modern systems, but the behavior, the logic, the mechanism, all of it is unchanged. What the worm revealed was not a flaw in software. It was a flaw in how the internet understood itself. Before the worm, the implicit model of the early internet was that of a library. An open, trusting space where people came to share and to learn, governed by professional norms rather than technical enforcement. You did not need a lock on the door because everybody who came through the door was assumed to be a colleague. That model was not wrong for the community that existed at the time, but it was fragile. The assumption of trust, never written, never formalised, never tested, shattered on the night of November 2nd, 1988, and the thing that replaced it, the assumption of adversariality of risk, of the need to defend every system against every possible intrusion, has defined network design ever since. Every firewall, every encrypted connection, every intrusion detection system is, in part, a response to what happened that night. Almost every major security practice in use in the modern internet traces its conceptual lineage to the weeks after the Morris worm. Patch management, the formal process of identifying and distributing fixes for known vulnerabilities, intrusion detection, monitoring systems for signs of unauthorized access, incident response, the formalized practice of coordinating a counteraction, network segmentation, dividing networks into zones with controlled access between them, all of it grown from a single night. The internet's immune system was built in a panic in 1988. It has been reinforced every single day since then. The worm itself lasted less than 72 hours in the wild before it was contained. Its consequences have lasted nearly 40 years. The machines it crashed were decommissioned long ago. The operating systems it exploited are entirely obsolete. The passwords on its list have been changed 100 times over. But the world it made, cautious, defensive, aware of its own vulnerability, is the world we still live in. In the archives of institutions that preserve the history of computing, a copy of the worm's original source rests in a carefully maintained file, time-stamped to the evening of November 2nd, 1988. It is treated with the care that is given to primary sources, a document that cannot be replaced, that tells something important about a moment before which things were one way and after which they were another. Historians call it the first artifact of the digital security age, the thing that made the modern internet necessary. A single vintage computer sits behind preservation glass in a research archive, its screen dark and its power disconnected. The machine is perhaps 30 years old. Its plastic housing has yellowed. It is the kind of object that draws no attention in a room full of more interesting things. It sits in its case without ceremony, without explanation. It looks harmless. Everything about it looks harmless. And yet the software that changed the internet was written on a machine exactly like this one. The question the graduate student was trying to answer: how large is the internet? Has an answer now, though it changes every second. The internet spans billions of devices, crosses every border, touches nearly every human life. It is defended constantly by systems and organisations and practices that trace their origin to a single night in November, 37 years ago, when a small program escaped its author's intentions and changed everything it touched.